Welcome to ThugCrowd Radio. Please listen to this important disclaimer in its entirety. All participants of this ThugCrowd Radio episode are characters. None of the stories told during these episodes are based on facts, truth, or reality. All works of fiction displayed during this episode that resemble real-life situations are coincidental and are not meant to serve as guides or tutorials to commit any crimes in any country. Please consult an attorney for local laws and regulations. And as always, trust your inner criminal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Sunday edition of BugCrowd. How you doing?
Yo.
Yeah.
Ready
The
for
Monday.
on, bruh.
Oh,
It's
that Monday morning show. Let's go. Oh yeah. So today we're going to be talking to Casey Ellis in about an hour from BugCrowd about just kind of everything we were talking about a bit before, more of the sort of hard-hitting questions, I guess, that we were going to save for him, mainly about like scope issues and disclosure and things like that. And then in the hour before, we wanted to have some of our researcher friends discuss some of their sort of experiences, challenges, and everything in between. So we can get right into it. Actually, Sick, if you want to talk a little bit about what we were talking about before, that'd be cool.
regarding what exactly? Sorry.
Well, actually, your recent write-up and any of the other sort of challenges that came with that.
Well, I tend to get the same challenges regarding everything, really. The industry in general, the wider industry, not every company has a bug bounty program. So when you go and find these things, it's such a a struggle to actually report these things. And it's like the industry does not understand security and the importance of it.
So if you find something and you want to report it and they don't have like a bug bounty program, how, like, what's the first, you just what, send them an email?
Yeah, pretty much what you can do, man. You can, well, nowadays with companies being a lot more active on social media, you can normally get a hold of them a lot faster via that. But the problem with that is they're just social media staff, support agents. And they'll expect you to, send technical details over a Twitter DM and say it'll get forwarded to, the right department. But in reality, it never actually makes it there. So your best bet is to find a few emails, especially see if you can even find developers' emails from like LinkedIn and stuff, and contact them that way.
Yeah, I've definitely found a disclosure before as well that like I've spoken. So at one point I spoke to like the head of mobile engineering or something. Who was a
Hey, sorry, I had to actually get up for a second. Have we shared your link in the chat? Your write-up, Six?
No, hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in the Discord chat.
Okay. Oh, cool. Alrighty. Yeah. So this write-up was really cool. But I like the way that you had approached actually finding stuff. But yeah, as we were saying before, actually, we discussed this before the show. Like, it's difficult for companies sometimes if they don't have like a good security posture to actually take in bug reports and vuln reports. And that's a challenge that I see from a lot of people is they just don't know who to actually talk to.
It's hard to understand, how to go about it when these corporations are so big and you need to speak to such a particular small team.
Mhm.
And, that's even if they have a team.
Yeah.
So
and
it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
yeah, exactly. Hey, ZLZ. So we can hear him. Oh, bye. No, I mean that's something that I see there's a lot of different people is like trying to find the exact person to talk to, and like one of the things that I've always tried to do when I try to report anything is to write whatever my initial contact is in like the most generic form possible that I can explain enough that if it was like somebody who might be a little bit more technically savvy could be tipped off on, but something that somebody who might be in like a triage type or help desk or whatever kind of a situation they're in to respond to emails to actually be able to understand what you're saying in more like layman's terms. So you want like somebody who's just anybody at the company to understand what you're saying without overloading them with like, and this specific API call and this like function of, BigQuery and all this, any sort of random, or sending them as like code snippets also is not good either for POCs.
Yeah, because they just simply won't understand and it would be kind of overwhelming for them.
Yeah, and that whole aspect of creating or doing good communication is yes, doing good communication, communicating well is something that's definitely very important for a lot of people to actually learn about when they start looking into this kind of stuff. ZLZ is having an issue with the microphone. Hold on. So yeah, but has anybody in here done any sort of bug bounty stuff recently?
Well, I could reiterate what happened with Discord the other day.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome actually.
So Discord paid me a whopping $25 for the bug that I reported.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you bought a couple 12s or what?
Oh yeah. And it was, I'm like looking back at I think the next time I submit a bug to a company that has, because they have a bug bounty program, I don't think I'm gonna give it all away in the first email. I think my initial, and I don't want it to sound like extortion, but essentially I feel like I should lead off by saying, hey, in theoretically, like what would this sort of bug be worth to you?
I think that's a good way to go about it, and that's a huge disconnect. Is everybody's going to try to undercut you at some point. So if you have information, you want to withhold it, and whether or not you want to give it to good or bad, like weigh both your options.
Yeah, I definitely made that mistake one time. I was talking to Six about this before the show with I won't disclose the company, but it was a specific company's like one of the platforms for hiring and recruitment, and I'd found an SQL injection in an older version of their software that was still deployed, and it was deployed in a couple different spots. And so through this, I was able to do some interesting things, and I ended up sending them a report that had all of the screenshots and POCs and detailed explanation of the bug and sent it to their security team. And after getting grilled for like an hour on the phone and then telling me that it's from an old version of the software and that it doesn't matter and all this other weird mumbo jumbo and getting questioned about who I am and like what I did with the site besides this and like yada yada yada, I got slapped with something that told me that all of my what's it called? All of my information, like all my write up and my screenshots and everything were now their intellectual property, and I'm not allowed to talk about it. At all. And so I literally, if I hadn't done this and I had actually been able to sort of like egg them on a little bit instead of just giving them everything and then them just sort of like critiquing my phone report and then yelling at me, I probably would have been able to like actually have gotten something done and maybe gotten some prize money or something. But yeah, it sucks and it feels bad when you like don't actually get the information across, or you oversell yourself, or you sell yourself. Yeah, you basically just like end up screwing yourself over that way, and it's not cool.
Yeah, and the whole like outsourcing for infosec and not having someone that's actually actively looking at stacks is pretty disturbing to me personally.
Yeah, no.
I think that's a huge disconnect for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, like so, like you're talking about like companies with a lot of security posture in general. They just have
exactly. Like the fact that they expect like in-house IT support to step up or take hold of that and grasp it for what it is and be able to create or automate.
It's definitely hard, especially for like younger companies, that might not have the capacity to do stuff. I mean, there's certain companies that are, less than 10 people that are running some major apps that we have, and so it's hard for them to, as far as like having somebody understanding things intimately as they do. But then sometimes it's just like the company is so big that they, how do you triage every single issue in all of your different projects after all of your mergers and acquisitions as well?
Yeah, that too. And I'll never understand companies that, want somebody to wear 10 different hats when it's not even, applicable or it's not possible for them.
Yeah.
They've already got that workload. And the fact that somebody hasn't actively thought about security and it's 2018 is pretty scary. Like he was saying, it was reporting a bug to a big corporation. You would honestly think that they would have an active red team of some kind.
Yeah. It's surprising how many just don't, and I don't even know where their emails go to. And then there's a couple of instances that I've had too where it's hard to find anybody to report to, and you end up going through like a weird ticketing system where you go through like some sort of other back channel that assumes that you're like a customer or something, and it's like definitely weird. Like I've actually had to like try to figure out how to get into login portals to be able to report something because there's no other contact info for the company.
It's just poor practice.
Yeah, definitely. No, there was something that I had found recently too that I was trying to report, and after I reported it and gave them all this info for something that was pretty bad, they asked me like why I was what's it called? Like they asked me why did I report the information to them? Like after I had told them about what it was and like how it's like bad, they still didn't understand it. It's just like it's weird. I'm like, you're the person who's the first line of defense in triaging this stuff, and you don't understand like why somebody would report a vulnerability to like help you. It seems weird.
Yo, check, Mike. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
What's up?
Oh my God, there we go.
Hi.
Hey, so yeah, I was just gonna say before, like, there's definitely been some bug bounty stuff where like there's one company that I want to submit a whole bunch of stuff to, but all they offer is thanks, and it's like I've got these sick bugs which I won't say what they are, but they're worth money, and I don't, again, like README said, I don't want to go about trying to extort anybody, but I feel that it was a considerable effort of research. I had to purchase the product, and when I said something about it on Twitter, and the support team got back to me and they're like, "Is there something we can help you with?" And it's like, "Well, actually, I can help you. Like, this is," and they just didn't get it. So
yeah. No, it's tough because I've seen that there was like there's some bug bounties on different platforms that do it for points and for thanks, and it's like I don't know. It's tough because then once you get yourself out there, and people are actively scanning everything, all of your assets, then you're just kind of sitting yourself. It's a challenge, and I definitely want to ask Casey about that and how he advises companies to set up their programs because, I mean, doing just thanks for something that's like pretty big, it might just let people find bugs under the guise of that, and then just being able to like exploit them elsewhere.
It's a great conversation about free programs and 4 points programs, because one of the big things is right now, I think at this point, you can kind of decide what programs you want to participate in. I think it's really bullshit when companies that are worth billions of dollars go and they have a bug bounty program where they take in serious, vulnerabilities, and they're only giving thanks or maybe a T-shirt. I think it is kind of bullshit when they don't want to allocate that, because that's just on the company's behalf, is that they don't really understand that is something they should put time into. And more, like over time, you notice companies they will develop like programs like this, and they will like kind of start to understand it. And one of the things that happens with that is like either through like a year of just being ridiculed for being a really shitty T-shirt program, they'll go and they'll start paying bounties, or something will happen like they'll get hacked and they kind of have to put more resources into it. Like a big thing with like one of HackerOne's earliest customers is Yahoo, and before they were paying for vulnerabilities, they had a customer support agent who took in bug submissions, and this guy found this really bad vulnerability in Yahoo Mail, and he submits it to the guy. And then out of generosity, the guy's like, hey, I don't know, I can't really do much for you. We don't have anything set up, but I'll send you a T-shirt. So, initially people thought it was like Yahoo had this T-shirt program, but it was just this guy. But the guy freaked out about it, and he's like, yeah, I reported this really serious vulnerability in Yahoo, and they only gave me a T-shirt. And, it's T-shirt gate. And then right after that, Yahoo's like, okay, we're going to step it up. And then they actually like established that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. The thing is, like, I don't feel that a company should be obligated to pay for vulnerabilities. I feel like if they have defined terms and you read those terms, you agree, like, okay, this is what they're offering if I find vulnerabilities, don't waste your time, Like, you're getting points only. It's not worth it to approach a company that's points only and be like, hey, man, I know your points only program, but, I found this critical bug. At this point, there's so many available programs public right now, right? Even Valve went public, which is a huge thing. You find vulnerability in like CSGO game servers or Steam's website, things like that. It's a paid vulnerability, right? Like if you think you're good enough and you have something to offer, then take a look at one of these programs. But what I've seen in the past is people will build up it's just like like hack the DoD, get some points, and then you can get some private invites, and then you can build off that. And I think it's a really interesting ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a huge gap right now, and anybody who's willing to like step into SMBs, I think is going to make a killing. Whether it's based off BugCrowd or based off something fresh, I think that's a very important thing, and I think that's a really good business idea for anyone to take hold of. I don't want to personally do it, but I'm just saying.
I don't know. How do you? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's quite obvious that most SMBs don't have the money to actually pay for an in-house red team or actively look at this stuff. So that's all I want to say.
What I see a lot of the time, Boba Fett, are you? I see your mic. I don't want to be interrupting you. I don't know if there's something. My Discord's been acting up all day. I see your mic moving. I don't know if you're talking and I'm interrupting you, or like what's going on.
He was having mic issues earlier, so we'll see what happens.
He died again.
Gotcha. Yeah, but what I was going to talk about is I see a lot of people who they approach a random company and they do like a full pen test of them, right? They'll do hours and hours of work and do a company that has no defined security like guidelines. They don't even have a security email, and then they expect something from the company, which I think is total bullshit. I think the company should thank you, and I think it's really bullshit that Computer Fraud and Abuse Act like really does give the company this upper hand of saying like, hey, it's your report's now our intellectual property. We're going to arrest you if you do it again. And I think it's kind of a bullshit approach for a company to take. But I think it is, on the other hand of it, a bullshit approach for the researcher to think that the company should reward them for something they didn't ask for. That's why most pen tests, pre-bug bounty is like it's all contracts. You agree to something. You should agree if money's involved. Like both parties need to acknowledge it.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's funny. This is a new thing. I mean, this is something that like hasn't been around for that long. I mean, even like the penetration testing it's not a young field, but the whole like having a vulnerability disclosure program rather than people just exploiting it and that's it. Like, that kind of thing is like is new, and I feel like the whole like posture of it and the fact that it's global now definitely leads to a lot of really unique challenges that can't wait to hear what Casey has to say about it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting sort of thing with how companies approach it without they want to be on board with it, but they don't exactly know how to approach it in a way that will encourage people to actually do it. But I think it's having discussions like this, having this kind of stream, having people being able to talk and discuss directly with people like Casey is definitely good for showing like what companies want and what researchers themselves want, like people like us.
Absolutely.
I just had to switch mics. But what I was going to say before was, like a long time ago, I had a bug on Facebook through when they had their Canvas. There was Canvas apps and there's iframe apps.
Yeah.
And through the Canvas apps, it was like a JavaScript sandbox. So I broke the sandbox using a Firefox technique where. Well, it was a Firefox bug where function and window were in the same namespace, so you could statically call a val using like instead of the keyword eval, you could put it just like hex encode it, and then throw your parentheses at the end, and then like any payload you want is a string, so it wouldn't be it would break the sandbox. So you'd have like the window element on Facebook, and I think it was like $500 or something, and I was just like, what? Like, no, I'll just keep it. And like, I didn't end up doing anything with it, but I was like, I could like this isn't. I don't want to hand this over for $500. I didn't disclose it. It got patched. It actually got patched in Firefox, which is what really like fixed it. But yeah, I was kind of like, it's not even worth going through all the effort to like get this sort of sorted out. Like whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with them.
One thing that from a triage perspective, I could see maybe I know the Canvas it's explicitly like out of scope on their thing, right? And obviously you bypass it and you got out of the sandbox. But I think what could have happened, maybe just from like a guess or something like that, is maybe the analyst on the other side of it saw that it was out of scope, and then they saw that maybe they did bypass something, so maybe it was like a word out of gratuity. I'm not too sure, but I feel like that may have been like a miscommunication or something internally. So I would forward.
This is really old. This was like before they were doing Hall of Fames and shit like this. So like at the time, I'm not even sure there was a bug bounty. This is like this is many years ago. Like Facebook was new.
There's a really interesting conversation about I'll just sell this on the black market or whatever. I'll sell this bug, and I think that does exist in some cases, but for the most of the time, like I don't see that too much. Like people are like, well, why do people report bugs to platforms when they could just sell it? And maybe for like 5% of bugs, 5 to 10% of bugs, I think that's the case. But like at the end of the day, when you approach bug bounty, like realistically, like a cross-site request forgery to update your favorites list on Yahoo or Google isn't really gonna sell too much to an adversary. But it's an interesting conversation for those like 5% of bugs, which like, hey, I could spread like some sort of JavaScript worm on Facebook using this.
Yeah, the other thing about selling bugs on the darknet or like to nation states or whatever is like you're gonna need a broker or something and you need contacts. You need to be established. You need a reputation that is your infamous reputation. Like if you just hit up if you Google you Google who do I talk to at the FBI and you email them a POC and be like, I'll sell you the weaponized exploit. Like that's probably a terrible idea. I would recommend that nobody does that ever.
Yeah, we don't want anyone on Vault 7 for sure.
Yeah, like it's just kind of like you can't just like people say I'll just sell it to like the Russians. It's like who? What Russians? Like where are you going? Like find it. Like go do it. I dare you. See how much money they even offer you if they offer you anything at all, and then hopefully like your family will be okay if it doesn't work.
Right. Oh, you know what? I forgot to mention this really quickly. Should I talk about the Dark Web movie?
Yeah, you should talk about the Dark Web movie.
Yeah, I completely forgot to mention it before. Okay, so guys, in all seriousness, yes, we're very pleased to announce that the movie Unfriended 2: The Dark Web is officially going to give BugCrowd listeners a free screening of this movie on Friday in New York City. And so the theater, like in the I told them that it was the Friday night would work best. and they're going to get back to us with information about the theater and the actual details of how it's going to play out. But yeah, we tweeted at this movie. We told them that we liked their movie. We thought it was cool, and it seems like a cool concept. It's like a slasher film about the deep web, and yeah, they want us to like come, and so we're just talking about it now. I don't. If you guys can say something to them on Twitter or whatever too, say that you heard about it from us or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to really mean. We haven't really done to try to do any like sort of like tie-ins or sponsorships outside of things that are within our InfoSec community itself. But this is just like an interesting movie, an interesting concept, and yeah, I can't wait to see how it plays out. I'm really surprised that they reached out to us and they said that they would want, because I wanted to just do like a sticker or like a hoodie giveaway. Like imagine like a hoodie that just says like "Beware the dark web." Like I don't know, I would just like wear that. But they do this one better, and they're like, "Oh, we want to buy out a whole theater for you and all of your fans." So yeah, if anybody's in New York City, please hit us up on Twitter because we will be. I'll be there. I'll be at HopeCon with a couple people, and I think like Ill Will and some other people from around that area are going to come as well. So if anyone's down, come hang.
I think that like, so if you watch the trailer, it's like knowing what the dark web is, which I'm sure anyone who's listening right now or listens to this later is going to be aware, like how it all works, all that shit. How you browse onion websites and that kind of stuff. And it's not this. If you're expecting that from this movie, just like drop that and just get some like slasher Final Destination plus like the public's view of the darknet and just enjoy the movie. Don't try and you could probably pick it apart technically like all day long, but please don't.
In the trailer for the movie, they have like a code flash, and it's just like a git diff of an old version of Samba, and it's like reply.c in Samba. And I mean, if they were using like Eternal Blue or something as their attack vector to like get through, I don't know, to like kill people.
Yeah, it's probably like a translation for the general public, but it's good stuff to know. But as far as ThugCrowd, you're not going to find anybody here who's base level knowledge who's looking for something like that. That's the rough truth.
It's funny.
What's really I think what's funny is when you mentioned that it's like a git diff for like Samba. Like there's probably a bug in there for real. Like let's face it.
Yeah. No, I mean, but it was interesting to see, and I mean, I definitely think that this will open the doors for us to do some more interesting tie-ins with stuff. I don't want to ever become something that like we're like hyping stuff that we don't care about. But I thought this was funny enough because I really love like the way that people interpret like the internet and hackers, and I think that it's interesting to see how people actually think that people like us think. And how they think that like the deep web is like a thing that will like kill you somehow, and I mean people want that to be like the sort of general perception, and I can see why. But for me, I don't know. I just think it's funny, and I can't wait to see what they actually do.
I did draw a parallel though from the trailer and a talk from Zoz at an early DEF CON where his machine was stolen from his house, and in the movie, in the trailer, they show that the guy has this laptop that was left at an internet cafe, which is how that's the beginning, right? And Zoz actually did remote desktop into his machine that someone had stolen and find the guy, which I thought that was a pretty sweet parallel. Like it's it wouldn't be the same in real life as a movie, but like there is that kind of like idea there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. It's kind of the concept of like, I mean, I remember when I first like heard about Tor and the deep web or onion sites, like, I don't know how long ago, it's like over 10 years ago. I thought that like it was going to be similar to like this way that this movie sort of thinks it is, and it's interesting to see that there's people who like do still make those like red rooms and like other like random things that are just like scary for the sake of being scary, and it reminds me of like just old internet stuff in general, like old scary shock sites and just weird creepypasta type stuff that like used to get shared. Like I don't even know how I would find out about it, but like someone would post a link somewhere and it would just be this like horrifying thing. And, like I don't know.
Yeah, it reminds me of this like website that got taken down, and all the art was done in MS Paint, and it was like elite MS Paint art. It's the best MS Paint art I've ever seen, and the stories that went with it, they all start off really innocent. Like it's like this. The one that I can describe really quickly is a guy goes on a date with his like acquaintance's sister, and then they like end up going home together, and then like it starts getting weird from there, and then it turns into his like drug bender and like some crazy like all this, yeah, just the art, and that just like goes crazy, and you're like, what the hell did I just read? And I mean, like, you know, that's the kind of, you know, stuff where you're like, what? Like that? This was such an innocent story.
Yeah, no, there's like, I mean, if you remember, like things like any of the sort of like screamer videos, I used to love those a lot, and I would like get scared of them, and then also like send them to as many people as I could. But yeah, like the ones where they would have like some sort of like innocuous thing, and then this like horrifying like face and sound would appear. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of that, and like I think that like people don't do that as much anymore, and I definitely think it's time to make the internet a little bit scarier again. Like horror scary, not like, oh, we have like your grandfather's pacemaker kind of scary.
Well, you go deep enough. You go deep enough into those onion sites, you know, and there were people that would, and I don't know if it still exists. It probably does at some point, but there were people who would straight up kill people, like on live cam. Like people would just pay a certain price to join the room and take part in it. It's fucking sickening, and that's the scary
Yeah.
death that you don't really see much of anymore. But it's a weird truth, man. People that disappear and get killed on the darknet.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff too that like it reminds me of the same as like, I don't know, any sort of like playground urban legend kind of thing. But then there are actual commodity markets for like human traffickers and things like that, and really just sickening things that, yeah, I mean it's definitely a landscape that people don't often know about, and a lot of stuff too now. It might have happened like a couple different times, or maybe the instance that you described, but then other times a lot of it I feel like might be a little bit more hearsay because I've never seen any like concrete proof about certain things. It's more of like
I mean,
Sure.
conspiracy theories.
I mean, we've definitely seen all kinds of gore type, like there was like terrorist beheadings and all kinds of stuff that,
Oh yeah.
that goes around, you know. And I've actually seen like on Facebook, like of all places, well, actually there was the murderer on Thanksgiving maybe a couple of years ago who like shot a man like on Facebook live stream. I mean, he didn't do that for money or anything. That he just went out and did it because he's a psycho. And I mean, that shit still exists in a different form. But I mean, like, yeah, I prefer to like not see it. Like, I don't want, like, I don't need that shit in my brain. You know.
I'm not saying I wanted to by any means. I'm just saying that it existed and it's happened and it's disturbing for sure.
Yeah. Like, there was a lot of gore, like popular gore sites because it was edgy teen shit, and you know, like, yeah, there was a lot of the content, and that content wasn't, you know, it doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah, no, definitely craziness. I remember I used to go on a lot of really, really scary sites a long time ago, and like that was just like a thing that now, like, I don't know where to find that content anymore, and I don't look for it, and I'm glad I don't. Definitely
I know what you
edgy.
mean to seek that stuff out and like really try to watch it, but it's just like, why, you know?
I
Yeah,
don't
this is the horrors of the earth. Look, no, thank you.
Just the horrors of the earth, truly. No, I mean a lot of stuff too. What I find as well, and we can get back to bug bounties in a second, but one of the things that I've been watching a lot, or a good amount with lately, is just like really silly YouTube conspiracy videos, and just seeing some of the stuff that oh, hello. um, just seeing some of the stuff that people have misinterpreted as like a conspiracy or as some like paranormal activity, but it's really just like you can like by watching the video you can tell there's like just some guy with like a bot, or like some guy with like or some person with some weird puzzle that they were trying to do as like a challenge, and people think that it's a conspiracy or like some sort of like paranormal like thing or like some murderer, but like you're like, I don't know, who else would post like a bunch of like the same video over and over again with like scary images? Like somebody would like just they found out about selenium and they can like post a bunch of stuff like on YouTube really quickly. Like I don't know. It's just yeah.
There's also like people who create content like so whatever the flavor of the month is, whether it's UFOs, whether it's fluoride in the water, chemtrails, like whatever's going around, whatever's the topic of the second, they just post like fake videos and stuff to just like generate content, and then it all links back, and there's some whatever their advertising method is, the same thing, and the people behind it know it's fake, create it to be fake, and just like farm the people who want to believe in it.
Yeah, no, exactly, and it definitely gets a little bit scarier now that there's people that are just roped in by propaganda all day anyway. So like it's kind of just like, oh, just make up whatever and just test it out, and see how many likes it can get, and then change out this site that everybody's been sharing to like some weird like Viagra reseller website.
Yeah, actually, do you remember that guy? His wife went to jail for manslaughter, I believe, for shooting him because he got a encyclopedia which was quite thick, and he shot it like thick with like at least 5 Cs, and he shot it. They shot it first with an arrow as he held it in front of his chest, and the arrow didn't penetrate. After that, they thought it would be a good idea to shoot it with a 50 cal fucking Desert Eagle. And unfortunately, the bullet penetrated the encyclopedia like it was a piece of paper, which it is, and went into his chest, and he died. And that was totally in pursuit of Facebook YouTube likes, trying to get like YouTube famous.
That's not really unfortunate in like the Darwinian sense, though.
Right? Yeah.
No, it's definitely. I feel like now there's the ubiquity of cameras is when we get more scary, weird content that just gets caught on film. But a lot of it, though, people say is like unexplained or mysterious. But a lot of it is just like use your best judgment, and you'll actually figure out like that it's not as crazy as you think it is.
Yeah. Also, the fact that there's so many cameras kind of starting to disprove things, man. Like, why hasn't someone recorded Bigfoot yet?
Right?
Yeah.
Are we seeing any real UFO stuff besides that one military thing that the guy from Blink-182 shared? Like, everyone's got a phone now. Like, what's your excuse? Oh, I didn't hit record. Like,
Yeah, in the 60s, it was huge. It happened all the time. Like every weekend, there's of every military base, and then all of a sudden, like nothing.
right?
Where's Jesus and the miracles?
But yeah. What?
Like you were saying earlier, I was saying like I can definitely see why so many people like kind of want to believe in that stuff, because it would be so cool if something like there's some like really huge secret, someone's hiding. It'd be really cool to be part of like, can definitely see why people like love that content, because it feels really like you're this outside or this outside group that's like really it's something.
You're on the fringes, you're special, yeah.
Well, it was a little bit like the internet mystery, right? With the port that was just spewing data.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing, but not.
Yes. No, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. No, and that's the other thing too, is a lot of stuff is misinterpreted. And you're like, oh, you see a bunch of .ru TLDs in like a weird data dump coming from some weird port in like Dagestan. Oh, that's probably just like a leaky Tor node rather than like some government conspiracy. Yeah. But yeah, so cool. Oh, we got a diamond now. Nice. So yeah, Casey should be on. I didn't realize the time it was 20 minutes, so hopefully he gets in here. But yeah, we can still talk a little bit more about bug bounties. Just everybody on Twitter. I'll just share our thing about it real quick. Just I guess RSVP or say something to our host about Premiere. Hold on.
Not really like bug bounties, or kind of just like stay away from them. I'm just curious. I'd like to get like someone with that view, I guess.
Does anyone not like bug bounties?
Who are really against bug bounties and like just really don't like how they work. So I was just curious if anybody here was really anti bug bounty.
I'm not anti bug bounty, but I don't like them.
Not anti-bug bounty, but like I definitely feel the weight as being an engineer, like to step up my shit and pay attention to, my stacks and what I'm running.
That's pretty cool. That's good to get that viewpoint.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem I've had with bug bounties, like I know ZLZ, we've spoken about this before, was just that the way that the triage was handled with mine was basically they just closed as dupes, and after that I was like, are you kidding? And then like again this one that at the moment like they're gonna give me thanks, but it's like this is actually a pretty big vulnerability. You're gonna have a bad time fixing it. It's serious and whatever, like persistence and whatnot. So like I feel that like the amount of effort that I'm gonna have to put in to receive the bounty is more than if I was to just go and do something else. Whereas I know that other guys, like Naffy, for example, has a lot of stuff. He's been doing it for a while, right? So his process is very much automated. So he can go ahead and go and focus on like the meat, like the meaty vulns that he finds, and like bug chaining and stuff to get those good bugs. Whereas like I don't have that automation set up, so I have like this barrier to entry to like get on that level.
Absolutely. And I worked, so I was like a analyst at HackerOne. So I did like a triage for about 6 months. But one of the things I did notice was like most of these platforms, they are businesses, BugCrowd, HackerOne, all these new platforms that are coming out. And the fact that they're having on-house triage teams to assess vulnerabilities is kind of a double-edged sword, because like at the rate of processing submissions, it's like you really don't have the same level as a team. For instance, if the company is giving attention to a vulnerability, you really don't have the same focus for each submitted issue, to the point where it's like it's hard for, let's say you work really hard on a specific issue and it's determined that, for instance, let's say cross-site request forgery is out of scope. And you say, hey, we don't really care about this. And let's say you find, cross-site request forgery to account takeover or something serious. And you say, hey, like I know this is out of scope, but I want to submit it. And then you have an analyst say, oh, cross-site request forgery, tick 2 boxes, and it's out of scope, so we're going to go ahead and close this. I think that really kind of sucks, and there should be better, like the whole process, I think, of triage should be kind of time should be spent on that, and that should be fixed. But like also like remediation, and if you want to reopen and challenge that should definitely be like something to be looked into.
Yeah, so when with the ubiquity stuff, when so after all the bug bounty stuff happened, and I finally got paid and all that, and they hit me up on Twitter, I went out to Denver and met with them and sat in the room with one of the devs, and that was quite productive in one sense, like and I think they did a really good job by wanting to like meet me, sit down, and talk about the multitude of stuff that we've got fixed. But there was a few things that I really had to. It was a little bit of a battle just with the dev, because like there was a mediation between like obviously myself and the dev directly, where I'm like, well, look, this is kind of how this works, and he was kind of like, no, and it was just a bit difficult to get the point across, specifically where like in the, I guess I'm just trying to decide what I'm going to say here. So one of the things was like there was a null pointer exception where it was due to the compiler. So the code that we were looking at on the screen was code that I'd run through the Java decompiler, like a Java decompiler, and we're looking at the code that's now being generated by the compiler, not the code that the dev has written. And so what I'm trying to explain is not what this guy's familiar with. And I think then if you like extrapolate that back to the the triage team within HackerOne, understanding like the stack and whatever services that that company is using is pretty hard for an external party to like get in there, because they'll see the null pointer exception, but then they're not like translating that again across back to that dev. Is like they're going to be like, the dev's going to be like, what? I don't see this. Like, this is not the code I'm looking at. And then who's going to fix it? Like, how they're going to handle it? It's like pretty hard, I think.
It's where a DevOps person steps in and tells them to do their fucking job. Seriously.
You'd hope.
Yeah. I deal with that a lot.
So how do you make money, like as a living, being a bug bounty finder? Like how do you know how much time you spend on what projects or what like tasks before you contact switch to make actual like living off this like career?
Danny, you in the shower?
Yeah, that's really.
I think that's the call bridge, actually.
I think I sort of heard Were you talking about you're talking about like how does a bug bounty hunter determine like how many hours a week, how much, and like if you can live off bug bounties, or
If you want to know what to spend time on, like say you have an RFP or something, like I don't know, I'm looking at execution budget for like 10,000, and you can't find anything within like a day, you have like a hard limit where you're like, okay, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna switch on to something else because, like, if you don't find that, you don't get the money, you don't pay rent, like maybe it might be worth time to switch onto a new bug to try to find. I'm just wondering how that kind of like is it just like the skill of the job?
So I think what he's saying there is like if you're trying to make a living off bug bounties, how do you manage your time to say like I've spent this much time looking here, but I've got to pay the rent. So like when do I move on? Like how do you balance that?
was
That's
that
a good point.
so I think it's
Go ahead.
sorry, okay, and two will start talking anyway, but I think it's definitely, I wouldn't ever really suggest someone to do bug bounty full time unless they're really confident in themselves, but like see it as is like it's really inconsistent, and that's completely true. I think if you want to do bug bounty full time, one of the big things is like having a pillowcase or like a pillow of, let's say you earn $20,000 and you have that to rely on as you go forward. When I was in high school, when I was in like my junior year of high school, I worked at Dairy Queen like 40 hours a week as a just I was like a cashier. I made $9 an hour, and I got into bug bounty and I got like my first bounty, which was like $500. Obviously I didn't have too many expenses, but I was doing bug bounty like three hours a day, 5 nights a week, and I was making, I think that year I earned anywhere between like $70,000 and $85,000. So I mean, realistically, like if I wanted to do that full time, if you really wanted to get into that, I think if you had that pillow of money, and you wanted to go forward off that and pay your rent and things like that, it would be good to just play it safe. There are a lot of people who do bug bounty full time, and most of those people are in, like, I would say like not the United States, more like third world countries. There's a lot of people, India, Pakistan, people who are working like full time, and you could look into more statistics about these hunters. Report was really good, and one of the questions it asks is like, are you a full time bug bounty hunter? What's your salary? Things like that. But I think when it comes to like managing, if you're looking at a particular asset, and let's say you're like 3 or 4 hours into looking at this asset, and you feel like you're not going to find anything, I think it really is a thing about experience, right? One of the things, Nafi, DZ mentioned Nafi. He's a really successful bug bounty hunter. What he said one of his focuses is finding these boxes which are they found like 3 or 4 like vulnerabilities that are critical, or like the box and the coding and all that is just bad. Focusing on those boxes instead of like doing crazy reconnaissance and finding like one vulnerability in each box. But knowing when to move on is definitely a thing about experience, I would say. If you're focusing on, let's say, like some crazy asset and you don't find anything for like 2 days, maybe it's good to move on. But I think if you feel like you're on the brink of something, then keep working at it.
Smell the blood in the water.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Casey, hello.
How we doing? BugCrowd on ThugCrowd.
Good.
Yo. Hello.
Ooh. You guys were just talking about the whole "can you make a living off this stuff" question. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think I chimed in halfway through it.
Yeah.
I think what Sam was just saying is pretty spot on. Like the thing that we've heard a bunch of folks say that are trying to work towards, this not being a hobby or like extra cash, but actual subsistence income. Exactly what he just said. Like this whole idea of saying, okay, if this is a job, here's the hourly rate that I want to try to get from this job. And then kind of doing the math and not getting too strict about it, because there is that whole element of, feeling like you're close to something and needing to push a little bit harder, but being a little bit disciplined about, not spending a week on something that's, if that doesn't fit into your kind of hourly rate that you're trying to go for.
And I think one of the things that is really intriguing to some of these people who, if you look at bug bounty from a distance, you see like the really popular, how I made $40,000 from a Google remote code execution. And then you see these people who are like, all right, I'm gonna make 40 grand off this Google remote code execution. So they go and they spend 2 or 3 weeks on Google, but chances are they're not going to find that because that's such a peculiar, really, really driven bug to find. But what I think people
that goes back to what kind of skills they've got though, because I think you're exactly right. Like the success bias, the stories of the 40K bug or like the 100K bug or whatever draws a bunch of newbies out of the woodwork and gets them working really hard on stuff, and they don't necessarily have the skill to find that kind of vulnerability. But what it can also do is attract people that can. One of those things, I heard you talking about, Nafi's techniques and some of the people that kind of subsist off this stuff. It really does come down to knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're best at, and actually optimizing your workflows for that. And then as you're doing it, trying to learn new stuff and improve as a hacker. That's kind of my view on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like I don't know, people come in with the same sort of. I mean, I know that there's a lot of low hanging fruit kind of bugs as far as like when you do your basic enumeration and other things like that. But it's hard sometimes for people to understand that bugs nowadays are very complicated, and we're not just going to find like an open like PHP MyAdmin somewhere and like you might. But it's not going to be the technical. It's not going to be the thing that's going to happen.
It happens a lot more often than you'd think, to be honest. But yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, I mean that would happen, but that'd be something that would be very, very quick to find, Totally. And so a lot of things people are dealing with now, especially with some of the more complicated applications of things like, really, really robust APIs and really, just there's a lot of different complicated business logic at hand. And that's where bugs do lie. But I guess it's tough because sometimes people don't understand the full level of scope that actually needs to be covered when you are doing this sort of thing. And they might just get intimidated by it. And then it leads people to not want to get involved. But I mean, that's going to come with any sort of thing like this. You have to have a certain level of skill, I guess, and dedication to it. But it also, like, I feel like a lot of people get deterred from it. And I don't think it should be a deterrent to, I think that it should be like, oh, what the hell is this?
No, 100%. And I think it's a funny thing because, for some reason, the bugs that are less critical and more common tend to be easier to find as well. Like, I don't know if that's by design or if it's just coincidence, but, the harder stuff and the more critical stuff tends to be more rare, and it takes more time to execute and basically identify and build an exploit on top of, right? Meanwhile, you've got, things like IDOR or like simple reflected XSS or whatever else that's like literally fucking everywhere. And people can actually get into this and point it out in a way that's useful to the person who's running that application or that business, right? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily rocket science or the highest paying bug. It's not, the latest thing in the world. They might feel like it is, and that's great because that's going to cause them to learn more. And but yeah, like the whole idea of, rewarding like as Sam said before, like the $40,000 or the $100,000 or the whatever, like superstar vulnerabilities, that's a good thing, but it does create this kind of success bias that can actually discourage newbies from getting in and having to go.
I mean, Friends Roasted would have a show by now.
Yeah, well, there's that as well. Like, I think there is a bit of a rock star thing happening in this space, and I do think that there's a lot of credit where credit is due for the people that are doing really good work. But if that sort of tips over, like gets a bit too top heavy and tips over to the point where people that are not in that kind of level of bug hunting, where they're feeling discouraged from even starting in the first place, I think that's a failure on our part.
I think
so
that
we keep a close eye on.
I think that if you look at like bugs that come out of like Tavis, right, where he did recently, like Google, not Google, Blizzard, the Blizzard app, then uTorrent, and like some other stuff, like all DNS rebinding attacks, like all in one go. That's it's really interesting because you look at it and he's figured out the bug class and he's just looked in the right place. Now, is it like figuring out the first one was probably like, he was like, whoa. And then like the others probably kind of just like chained down, like lesser and lesser. So I guess it could be the same if you're like that bug bounty guy and you like go, oh, I found this DNS rebinding attack. Let me go check these other things I've previously checked and see if that also is affected,
Exactly. Like the thing, I mean, speaking from the perspective of someone who watches a lot of this go on, The people that tend to be most effective, like they can do all sorts of different types of hacking. They understand, code, they understand vulnerabilities, exploitation, like thinking like a bad guy, all that stuff, right? But they've got their like top three. They've got their things that they really love, they've done recent research on, or they're just really good at owning. And then what they'll do is they'll think more critically about those three things in terms of where those vulnerabilities might exist, optimize their workflow to go out and find it. So, and I think that's what Tavis does, because you're exactly right. Like he got on a tear with password managers for a while there. Like he was hammering antivirus for a bit. And when you look at the techniques that he used for the bugs that he disclosed, there was a lot of similarity between all of them, because what he'd identified is the fact that here's the thing that engineers commonly fuck up. So it's probably out there. So let's go find it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I saw your. I forget who had actually done it. Was it Jay Haddix who did a Stan's thing on the top phones that you guys have found over the past year or so? It's interesting to see the kinds of bug classes that were actually the most common, like XSS stuff. And
it's a funny thing too, because I do think out there in terms of the broader perception of bug bounty programs, like there's this whole kind of idea that all we find is XSS or like really simple remedial issues, and that's true from a quantity standpoint, but that's mostly because they're more common.
Yeah.
and they're easier to find. Like if you just look at the math and kind of the quantities of different classes, it actually doesn't tell the full story. So I mean, like what we're talking about now in terms of risk versus reward and kind of the effort of going in and pursuing a vulnerability, like that gets even more interesting when you start talking about like handsets and cars and medical devices and shit like that. Like that's when it gets really deep, and you're starting to talk about like weeks or months of work to get a single thing to pop, right? But if you can get to that point, we just we just processed a reward for Samsung for 114K, and they're running a bounty on their mobile devices. So I can't talk about the bug. You can kind of get a feel for what was going on there. And it's that type of thing where, like the difference between finding XSS in a platform and finding a thing in a handset, the same sorts of skills that are being drawn on, like that same kind of curiosity, that same kind of hacker mentality, pull shit apart, put it back together, like think bad but do good, all that stuff. But there's just different levels of difficulty involved and different levels of creativity from the people that are doing it that gets brought to bear.
There was one bug in it originally came from Uber, and it's one of the challenges for server-side template generation on Pentester Lab. Shout out Pentester Lab and Louis. But that particular bug was interesting because it's this template engine, and it seems pretty not that you couldn't get that far with it, but it turned out that you could actually move through the Python references right back up to every Python library that's currently loaded, including OS system, popen, and eventually you got RCE through it. And it's just in Uber where it was originally found. You start reading the bug report and it's oh, this looks like nothing, and then by the end it's RCE. You're like, whoa, that's actually sick.
And I think that's part of it as well. We've seen the weirdest shit chained together to get a really significant impact to a company or to a business, right? So I think this whole idea that you can have fairly trivial things as your initial entry point, and then once you get past that, you find other things that are more critical or more impactful, and you kind of pull them together, and all of a sudden you've got a big problem, right? That's one of those areas where I think this whole idea of just optimizing for RCE and injection and stuff like that's where it's a bit flawed, because that's not the full story.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week as well. If you hoard a whole bunch of, say, XSS or something low, they're probably footholds for the good shit. Like you're saying, they're the footholds for the good shit. So maybe don't report straight away. Hold off for a second.
And what they also do is they tell you about the development culture of the company, right? If you're seeing dumb stuff all over the place, then that's a pretty clear indicator that security like secure code training or secure, development kind of just basically getting your engineers not to do dumb shit is not a part of that company's culture or how they invest in their business. So that actually gives you an indicator of what their overall posture is going to look like, right? So yeah, it's all this big. It's actually far bigger than. I mean, this is the challenge of it, because we deal in specific issues, right? Like one person gets paid one bounty for one bug, and that bug gets fixed. But what that one bug is doing is telling the company a bigger story around, all of the other problems that it might have, and it does the same thing on the supply side as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you like specifically about engineering as a whole and where you see the gap in training or where you see the gap in experience, because a lot of these positions, whether they be, system DevOps or network engineering, you see a lot of requirements that are like 10 plus years of experience, whereas 10 plus years in the past 10 years has evolved so damn much. Like there's no possible way these engineers can possibly keep up. And I think that's a huge damn gap. And I think it's important, like as far as what you're doing on an enterprise level, you're just pointing out the flaws as where their hiring process or where their HR has literally failed them.
It's HR, but like when you think about it, it's actually economics really that's at fault, because you can build a product, not give a shit about security. That product will still work and people will still buy it, right? So and then in the middle of doing that, you're trying to figure out how to do security well, and that slows getting the product out to market down, so it gets deprioritized. And like I don't think that's a right thing or a good thing, but when you look at the incentives that are in play, that's kind of the nature of things right now. So I understand why that happens. And you're right too, like things do change, by the second. I think the big thing that's changing in terms of engineering, like, the startups and tech companies are the obvious example of this, but it's starting to happen in the enterprise as well, is this whole imperative to push stuff out to market, more quickly. And I think like agile DevOps, like the whole, CDCI, like just getting stuff out, pushing code more frequently and keeping it fresh, that's a good thing ultimately. But if you forget security as a part of that process, then you're in for a bad time.
I was recently speaking with an accounting firm, let's just say that, and their product's been around for a while, 10 years plus, and they're building out their SecOps and AppSec and stuff. And so I was talking to them about that. And, one of the things that I brought up is like, it's great that you're doing all this new security stuff, that you're implementing all this stuff. You want to train your developers. You want to look at like your SecOps options. You want to like build it out and do all the good shit. But at the same time, if you guys got owned tomorrow, you've got these customers that are like never going to leave. So like while they're doing the right thing, if they didn't do the right thing, their customers would probably stay with them anyway. And it's like, I guess that's a business decision.
And it is, and like all of this is like we're talking about. I mean, it's funny because like I'm passionate about like abilities and bugs and people that find this shit and getting into that stuff and trying to stay semi-sharp myself, like all of that. But at the end of the day, we're just an extension of risk within the business, right? And they're making risk decisions when they hire someone like that. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on where this is just one piece in the broader puzzle that a company's trying to put together. So, it's good to keep that in mind. I think it's also good to keep in mind that it gets deprioritized a bunch. So we do, need to make a little bit of noise to encourage people to give a shit. And it's a funny thing because I think, in terms of losing customers, I was on the Many Hats Club chatting with Stu yesterday and called out the fact that like when I started BugCrowd and landed in the USA for the first time, that was the same month that Snowden dumped the docs on the NSA, right? And the thing that triggered, apart from a whole bunch of political, all of that stuff, was that it got the average person thinking about hacking in a different way. It's like, okay, being attacked through my computer used to be this kind of ephemeral, subject of movies that I don't really understand or whatever. Being told by people that I trust that it actually impacts me directly. And I think like the whole, security industry across the board has taken a pretty strong lift ever since that kind of moment. Just because, the average consumer is more aware of the fact that it's a thing. So, I don't know, like is that going to change? Is, this suddenly going to become really easy for us? I'd like it to. I don't know that it will, but shifting.
Interesting. I've been trying to do this from the inside, like a lot of what you guys are trying to do, but small companies, so 300 and under. So a lot of times it's like, hey, baby's first, security program of any sort. Like you don't have any employees, let's try to get them. From your perspective, it's unique because you got a lot of different tools that I don't necessarily have to try to push the company in different directions. But there's a lot of times when, I mean, obviously in the state where what BugCrowd is helping them do doesn't necessarily allow internal changes at a company that are important for these types of improvements, culture improvements to happen. I'm assuming you've run into that quite a bit when you have a company who just needs internal change, but you're not able to kind of approach that or push that. So I don't know. Do you have any commentary on that? Any ways you've helped solve that?
Totally. It's well, and as to solving it, no.
Exactly.
But in terms of my experience of it, like we did have a period, with BugCrowd where we decided to try letting people run vulnerability disclosure programs for free on the platform. So it's this whole idea of like, you can just sign up, get an account, do all that stuff, and off you go. And you're on your own. Like you can basically make this work. The software is going to help you as much as it can, but you're not going to get our kind of consultative help around making it successful. And pretty much what that triggered was a bunch of startups jumping in saying, yeah, cool, I'm going to sign up for that because I want to be cool, right? But they didn't care. Like they actually didn't care. So they're getting all of this input from hackers of all sorts of different, incompetency and maturity out there on the internet. But they ultimately were in it more for the press release and being able to say that they were part of the cool club than they were about actually getting that feedback. So we shut that down. We basically killed that off after about 3 months.
Nice. Definitely with
if you don't, I mean, I think that's the golden rule of trying to convince people, like, don't sell security to people that don't care about security. Like, fuck that. Let the bad guys teach them.
Yeah. Has there been any obvious sign you've seen with customers where even with now you're managing it, but what are some of the obvious signs from a company that this isn't going to work?
Like response time is the biggest.
Okay.
I think people that just ignore stuff that comes in. We do a fair bit on the front end to make sure that there's as little for them to look at as like possible, right? Like they can look at everything that goes through the platform, but we basically triage everything that goes through in a way that allows them to apportion time efficiently and things like that. If there's someone even in spite of that who is pretty much belligerent in terms of how they're responding to the issues that we think are important, as well as the hacker, then that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one example. I think payments, like a lot of people talk about, you're not rewarding enough. I actually don't think the market's mature enough for that to correlate yet. I think some companies get it, some companies don't, and like the people that are going out and offering huge rewards, like there's folks that are doing it well, but you got to remember that Facebook came out and said, we're going to pay out $1 million bug. Actually, it was more than that, but and they're not going to do that. The Google for a period of time talked about an unlimited upper threshold on their reward, which is logically untrue because they have a market cap that, if they paid more than that, they wouldn't be a business anymore. So there's all of this different stuff where it can kind of go in both directions. But I mean, broadly speaking, I think, as this evolves and goes forward, bug pricing will start to normalize. I think where a company is, different classes of issue will start to be a reflection of their maturity. I do think we're a ways off from that at this point.
Nice. Cool. Thank you.
So I have just as someone who I just submitted my first bug bounty thing the other day, but I find it a little bit intimidating when I look at the list of open programs And I think like, man, like there's like thousands of people looking at these companies right now. I'm probably not going to find anything. You know, like, do you have any like words of encouragement, you know, for me?
Well, people do. I think people do. You know, the ones that find stuff, and this goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier around like understanding what you're best at and going off and doing that. Because maybe no one else is good at what you're good at. Do you know what I mean? Like that's one of those things that we've seen, and this is where, you know, I think this whole idea of people to give this feedback and not just individuals is so powerful. It's because everyone thinks differently. Like we're not talking about, you know, issues that were put there on purpose necessarily. We're talking about mistakes that take people with a kind of an adversarial mindset to find. And yeah, maybe you think differently to others, and you can go off and do that. So, I mean, I'd keep going with it. Obviously, I'm going to say that anyway, but you know, what I have seen is you know, a lot of kind of surprised reactions from people that have looked at programs that have been around and public for a long time, and they found things that to them were quite simple, that were actually missed by everyone else, same as everyone else. So there's that. I think the other part of it is that, you know, new code and new changes are being deployed every day into a lot of these environments. So the fact that it's been picked clean, like quote unquote, by the public crowd doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't been changed since the last round of fixes.
I think as well, like when a lot of companies, specifically startups, will be like, oh, bug bounties, they're like the, you know, the golden gun. Like they're gonna kill all our vulnerabilities, and that's our security, like bolt-on afterthought. Whereas like in reality is we all know, like, you know, it needs to be, like you were talking before, at the developer level, the developers writing the patterns, the DevOps doing like the CI/CD correctly. Like there's all these things that need to come together to make it work. But you know, from a non-security company's perspective, like bug bounties will fix everything, you know?
Yeah, and they won't. Like you actually have to, you know, change what you're doing. I mean, like, and this goes back to what we were just talking about around, you know, engineering culture. I think there's two things that happen when a vulnerability gets submitted from the outside world, right? One is that the company knows it's there and they can actually fix it, like tactically. But ideally, what also happens is they have what we call the oh shit moment at BugCrowd, where it's like, hang on a sec, a kid halfway across the world just hacked our stuff. You know, he's friendly or she's friendly, but neighbor do, and are they malicious or not? So all of a sudden they start to, it's not just about finding the vulnerability, it's about actually creating more awareness of the threat.
Yeah, Casey, you've given me a lot of good advice and a lot of good reason to get into consulting, and I appreciate that. And it's, you know, awesome to talk to you on multiple levels and be able to, you know, hear your opinion on it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think like there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff that can be done in this space, and you know, I'm obviously a big fan of what we're doing at BugCrowd as a business. I'm a bigger fan of this idea of you know, as many brains as we can borrow, right? Like I think, you know, cybersecurity is fundamentally a human problem. Like technology just makes it go faster, right? So the whole idea of being able to you know, see more people and more sets of creativity be applied to that problem and actually, you know, make the thing safer, like that's a good thing.
So I had a question that we had been discussing for, and wanted to bring it up with you. It's specifically like how to deal with issues that people find that are out of scope. So like there's a lot of programs that have strict scopes, but somebody might find something that is pretty critical that might be in like, say, like a build system or something that isn't technically in scope, but is found in the course of doing vulnerability. And so if there's no infrastructure in place or they are rejecting out of scope vulnerabilities, how does BugCrowd, I guess, like if let's say the scenario is it's something that you know would be bad and that you know that they should care about, but it's not in the scope of their bug binding program, how do you communicate to them the importance of this and the business impact for them to actually act on it?
Yeah, so that's, basically, I have to give the consultant's answer here and say it depends, because sometimes there's organizations that we start to realize have a more proactive stance around security in general, and we know that we can land that message and actually get a good outcome for them and the hacker that's involved. I think short of that, like scope is not. It's a funny thing because one of the the complaints around scoping that I get a lot is this idea that attackers don't really care, right? Which is absolutely true. But at the same time, as a business, you can't go from not caring to caring about everything, overnight.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you have to kind of ramp that up. You have to, build out your processes, do all that stuff, like teach your engineers and your security team how to get this kind of feedback from the outside world and so forth. And the challenge with that is that if you do it too fast, you tend to freak people out and they just walk away from it. So it's an interesting thing because I think, ideally, in an ideal world, from my perspective, scope really kind of wouldn't exist unless you're an organization saying, hey, I've got this new thing. I want, 10 people to come and hack it. And it's more of a crowdsourced pen test than a bug bounty program or a vuln assessment, vuln disclosure program rather. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think what we try to do is take everything on its merits. Like if there's a scope that's been very clearly defined, then we try to help the customer defend that scope, and that starts to relate back to issues around safe harbor and making sure that you're hacking the right things and not kind of falling afoul of the law in the process as well. But there's a reinforcement that happens back to the hackers that are submitting the issues that's important as well. But yeah. It's really like it's an art, not a science right now. And once again, it's one of those things where, okay, we're dealing in kind of unintended consequences here. So we do the best we can to make things safer. But there's a lot that goes into that.
So down the line, like where do you see bug bounties as still being sort of the way they are today, or do you see more of like an integration with the companies or like with companies who you're involved with, or like what's the future look like for bug bounties, do you think?
I think there's two sides to it, and this is the part that's to me really interesting. There's this whole idea of the fact that the internet should be able to tell a company when something's wrong. Basic responsibility that is starting to become more established and more normal, that conversation should be able to take place. It should be safe. There should be channels for it, and the company should be responsive to that kind of input, right? The other side of it is frankly, it's labor arbitrage. It's the fact that there's not enough security people to go around in the first place, and then you've got this whole issue of the fact that one person being paid by the hour is never going to be as smart as a crowd of people, being incentivized by results. And I think the market's starting to catch on to that. So, to that effect, I think happen is that vulnerability disclosure. So this whole idea of forget about the reward for a second. You're just going to be able to found something, and you're also going to be able to be in a position where you can look for things and feel safe as you're doing it. I think that's going to normalize and become basically ubiquitous over the next 5 or 10 years. But I actually think that's going to tip from being the thing that to the thing that you would if you don't do over the next year or two. And then I think with bug bounty programs and this whole idea of like creating incentives and actually directing effort, which goes more to the access to labor thing that I mentioned. Some people are going to do it, some won't. I do think it's going to grow a bunch because, as I said before, there's not enough people to go around, and I think hiring security people is a problem that basically everyone has at this point. So yeah, growth is really the question, but definitely the ubiquity of vuln disclosure and the growth of bug bounty.
You mentioned a lot of like third world guys as well, like guys in developing countries who have now got access to the internet. They're learning about hacking and stuff. I guess with their development as well, that just brings a whole bunch of new talent to the table that will hopefully drive that as well, because $100 payout to me isn't shit, like I'll be like upset
Yeah,
But
but if
for
you live in
somebody
power,
else,
it's a big deal. Yeah, totally.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because we actually see that. Like, it's funny because there's a bunch of hackers from, countries with lower purchase power, lower purchase power parity. So like third world in essence, but where you can buy a Big Mac for 30 cents instead of $5, right? Who come onto the platform and engage in bug bounties right across the board, and do their work, and they're actually paying their bills and paying rent and doing things like that. Like, this goes back to the whole "can you make a living off this" question that happened earlier. If you're living in a place like that, you actually can at this point, and a lot of people are. But what we see them do is basically de-risk their testing by going after lower priority issues. Like, there's a lot of people from places like that can actually achieve some pretty critical stuff, but they're doing it because they need to pay the rent or pay their parents' rent or whatever else. So they turn it into a business for them personally, as opposed to a hobby.
So this is kind of, maybe I was sort of AFK, but it's a slightly different or similar question. Is it like in consulting a lot, we were given access to source code. Do you think there's any downside of that in bug bounty programs where people don't have access to internal documentation or things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, we do a bunch of stuff. Like, one of the things that BugCrowd does with people that work on the platform is we understand how much we trust them over time. So, like, there's skills on one side, and then there's trust, right? You can be a really good hacker, but someone who ultimately trusted with stuff like that. And the reverse is true as well. You can be someone who's not very skilled, but who's absolutely trustworthy. So we try to keep track of both, and make an assessment on that. And the thing that we've seen with companies that have given out documentation or source code, or more like making it look more like a white box thing than just pure black box, which is kind of the default of bug bounties right now. Like, people love it, and it gets better results. So I do think like being able to move in that direction is always a good thing where it's possible, but you have to make sure that the folks that you're giving that information to can be trusted with it.
That's definitely one thing. Like, so like white boxing is my preference, but obviously a lot of getting a white box test through a bug bounty is quite difficult without having that black box reputation. How common is it to get white box testing? Like, is it a lot of companies doing it, or is it just like the ones who know that they need it, or are like you advising people that they need it?
Yeah, it's the minority. I think ultimately it comes down to it's the people that trust us to make that call for them. Because when you think about it, when you get a white box test from a third party, right, you're trusting that company to trust its employees in a way that makes you feel comfortable with letting that stuff out the door. With crowdsourcing, it freaks people out because it's such a distributed model, and hackers are scary and all this other stuff. So we've got a bit of a higher bar to jump over there, I think. So in terms of what we're actually seeing, like, there's some that do it. It's definitely not the majority at this point, but we're trying to push it in that direction because we think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's definitely the case where if I say I'm a company, I don't know that much about security, and I know that my code is my intellectual property, and that's how I make my money. My business makes my money from my code. Yeah, I've got to give it to a stranger. Like, what up with that? Like,
Yeah, no, totally. But like, I guess the flip of that, and when we're talking about it, it's like, well, you already do that. Like, if you contract a consultancy to come in and look at your stuff, that same trust in them. So what we need to do is demonstrate that you can trust us with how we make assessments of how trustworthy people in the crowd are to the same degree. And like, that's again an art, not a science at this point, but we're making some progress because ultimately it's the same people a lot of the time.
It's pretty funny too. Just pop the box, steal the source yourself. All good. Pop the CI/CD. We're done.
There's also that. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. That's like accidental white box testing.
Yeah, I'm like at times I've had different, some companies provide more information, some don't really care, some can't even get their documentation together to hand it out, and it's just it can help like on the first stages to kind of figure out what's going on and where to start. So
No, I mean, like the more you can know about what you're trying to attack, the better. Like that's just true. So, I think getting organizations to a position where they're more comfortable with doing that with folk that are out in the crowd, that's something that we're working towards. And there are people that do it today. It's just not a kind of a common thing yet.
are there any guarantees for companies like that? I mean, do you have NDAs for people who are provided information?
So that's the other thing. Like when you say bug bounty, I think people, generally assume you're talking about a public program where everyone's invited and off it goes like that. The kinds of programs where there's sensitive information being given out, or there's like increased privilege or access to systems, that's different from what you could get off the internet in peacetime. That stuff should always be run privately, in my mind. NDAs and like non-disclosure around the vulnerabilities, but also the fact that the program's even going on is a thing.
Yeah, and I guess at that point, then you're just making another consultancy.
So can we change gears a little bit here and talk about the black market? Like the infamous black market where hackers can sell their exploits. I would love to hear your perspective on this whole situation.
The dark web?
I mean, as a good starting point, maybe, have you noticed the black market for bugs and vulnerabilities trending up or down in response to things like BugCrowd, sorry.
But you saw, Zerodium go out and do their basically equivalent of an offensive bug bounty program.
Yeah.
And, I want to say, like, the whole idea of, like, black market, white market, whatever else, like, to me, that's too confusing. I think about it in terms of offense and defense, right? Like, you're disclosing and being paid for a bug or for knowledge of a bug for the purpose of either killing that bug or keeping it alive. Like, to me, that's the easiest way to kind of break it down and talk about it. Because, is the NSA a black hat organization? Like, the answer is it depends on which side of the gun you happen to be sitting on at any point in time. So it gets pretty vague pretty quickly. But yeah, like offensive stuff. We've seen that. We've seen an uptick in that type of thing. I think the big distinction to draw there is that hosted platforms are very different from code that gets distributed and installed per user. So if you're talking about the difference between Facebook and like an iPhone, there's a pretty big delta in what you can get paid for a bug in each one of those because of what you're able to do with them, right? And also because the time to live for a platform is so much shorter. Like Facebook needs to fix it in one place, then it's done. Like Apple needs to go off and do testing and whatever else, and then roll it out to the part of their population that will actually install a patch and not hit like install later. Actually, like all of that affects the ultimate offensive value of a vulnerability. So I think what we've done is really brought more of that conversation out into the open, because I think prior to the establishment of a defensive vulnerability market and an economy, this was all happening. Like this has been going on for a long time in the offensive space, but it hasn't really been talked about, right? So this is kind of bringing that chat out into the open, which I think is interesting. It's we're learning a lot as we go along. That's one of the big reactions that's kind of come about from us popping out onto the scene.
Cool. I think MG had something else, but he's muted.
Yeah, this got really quiet.
No, I mean that definitely answers a lot of the offensive stuff. I have something. I don't want to necessarily jump off the offensive topic right away, but if there's nothing else, I did want to go back to what was it, the safe harbor. You're kind of mentioning that. I guess the gist of it was ultimately that once we get enough momentum, it just becomes a norm and everybody does it. But that's not the case right now. I think it's a really good thing to start pushing for. And
Yep.
I'm just curious what you've seen in terms of pushback. Has there been anybody? Are some legal teams giving specific reasons why it just is not going to work for them right now?
I think legal teams broadly don't spend a lot of time working on this type of thing. They don't really understand it.
Yeah.
So in lieu of that, they kind of trend towards being defensive. is really what it comes down to. So like any kind of changes around contractual safe harbor language to make hackers feel safer and to make the whole transaction of information clean and safe on both sides, they can be in a position where they say, well, hang on a sec, CFAA has our ass in the first place, so let's just rely on that. Then that's going to be their tendency because it's just easier. So it does need more work and more pressure, frankly, to kind of push it in that direction. I mean, I think the other thing with safe harbor, it's not really high on the radar of the average bug hunter right now. Like, I think there's a bunch of people that have been around in this space for a long time who get it, who actually get the implications of what we're talking about here and how it plays out in the future. And they're starting to get, pretty, trying to push it forward and make it happen. But the average hunter who's joining the space right now doesn't really care.
Sure.
So, there is that as well. So there's not kind of a forcing pressure aside from people like Amit, like, we're working on, we actually launched a, essentially a open source like vulnerability disclosure template 3 years ago that we're actually rebooting at the moment. Like, there's a lot of work that's starting to go into that from people in the space that actually get how this becomes pretty critical as it goes forward. But I don't think we've hit the point where the pain of like staying the same is more than the pain of change.
Okay.
So just to again switch it up a little bit, like just looking through the sort of public bounties and programs that have been running as well, I noticed there's like a shitload of web app stuff and a little bit of IoT stuff, a little bit of cars and that kind of thing. I know like HackerOne did planes and stuff at one point for a private thing.
Yeah, we did GoGo for a bit there as well, which was fun.
Yeah, awesome. Like all awesome stuff. But how, like, when it comes to disclosing a vulnerability that requires like you must have a Blade RF that has configured in this way with this FPGA module run. Like, how do you are there any, or do you see many bugs that require like a lot of hardware type stuff like Proxmarks and stuff like that?
No, to be honest, because I think like ultimately what it boils down to, like what we're spending most of our time on, you could break out into web, mobile, network or infrastructure, and then IoT. And like the latter, like the last two require or are helped if you've got your own test environment that you can spin stuff up on. But it's not really like, ultimately they're all either Linux or Windows boxes that have stuff sitting on top of them, and people know how to hack that. So yeah, I mean it's that's kind of where things are up to right now. I think when you start to get into automotive security, you've got some people that are getting into like and like self-driving capability, Bluetooth, like Wi-Fi, stuff like that, which is when you start to get a little bit more sophisticated to your question. But yeah, that's more the exception than the rule at this point, I'd say.
Right. So are those companies though, like other companies, like are the companies doing that stuff actually putting out programs, or it's just all web dudes mostly?
Yeah, I think the thing is that there's a lot of websites out there. So like this kind of goes to the point I was making earlier around the idea that like XSS is most of what bug hunters find. Yeah, it's because it's everywhere, right? I think the same thing applies to web. There's a lot more of that and there's a lot in that particular area than there are in others right now. So that's part of the reason for that. But yeah, I think that's where bug bounty hunting kind of started. It was Netscape and Facebook and Google and those folk that kind of, long before we came along, they kind of set the initial sail of this concept, and it's moving across into other things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, it'd be crazy to see, like, in scope is this like SCADA system that is an industrial network that runs like a factory, but don't send any wrong commands, you'll cause an explosion.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
just
that's
the
the problem
thing
with
is
SCADA.
that
Is
most
it's
SCADA
really easy
systems,
to DOS, right?
most
it's like
SCADA
dangerous.
systems are hidden behind firewalls, but websites are always exposed.
That's true.
It's true, but we still want to analyze infrastructure eventually at some point, right? I mean, this kind of gets into the white box versus public.
I mean,
All
with
over
bug
again.
bounties, people usually don't actually let you into their network. They just let you sit outside and knock at the door.
Yep.
And I think part of the answer to that, from my perspective, is we'd like to eat the whole elephant right now, but part of it comes down to, okay, like, how is this evolving, and where are the things that like, what types of testing, what kind of use cases, what kind of needs are there in the market that we can attack first, that are easiest and that are most likely to successful result, in a way that drives the whole thing forward. Because the other side of this is that broadly speaking, like, companies are still terrified of hackers. So, like, you go out there and say, hey, we want people to come in from the outside world and basically give you security feedback. Like, that concept in and of itself is horrendous to most people that you bring it to for the first time, right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea of, like, okay, let's go after the people that are doing it well, that there's some sort of kind of referenceable success out there in other places that we can point to, and kind of build it up from there. I do think it'll get there. Like, I think the whole idea, one of the things that was really interesting was watching the automotive industry switch on to bug bounties right after Charlie and Chris did the Jeep thing, right? Because all of a sudden they're like, shit, hang on a sec. Like, we're more vulnerable than we thought we were. And here's a pretty public demonstration of that. But then also what they learned was, the fact that that input and that feedback that ultimately made their product better came from the outside world. It wasn't from employees of the company or whatever else. It was from folk that were sitting there doing research, outside of the four walls of their organization. So at that point, it validated this idea that throwing out the net a little bit more broadly to people that can give that kind of input and actually inviting it and encouraging it, making it safe, that's something that is a good idea. And, the automotive industry and bug bounties went from basically not doing anything to doing a lot over the course of about 6 months.
Just to point out on that as well, like, if you are interested in car stuff, like, a Cantac for doing CAN bus stuff is $75. So, like, get one of those and go plug it into your car and see what you can do.
Yeah, and you can also play with TNC 3.2, I think, is the latest one that has a CAN bus, and then 3.6 has dual CAN bus. I was playing around with a bunch of that. It's like $30. You just got a microcontroller interface to do spamming.
The stuff from carloop.io is pretty cool as well. That's who we've talked to a lot about that kind of thing. It's interesting with car hacking, because I think car hacking as a term has been around for a bunch of time, but it means people tweaking their ECUs or their systems in their cars to and stuff like that. It hasn't been around security. So you've got people that have been messing around with software in cars for ages who are now starting to think about security, apply themselves like that, which is pretty fun.
Hey, so Casey, I had something that I wanted to bring up about, we had discussed before you got on here, about companies that do like just strictly points and thanks in their programs, and just how, I guess, a couple of us had different opinions on how to actually go about those kind of things, because there might be some sort of big vulnerability that you have, but you kind of maybe want to get paid if you find something that, like, could give you, like, root creds on something, how do you, I guess, how do you sort of deal with that, and how people actually approach those programs? Like, how do you, I guess, what's your take on that?
I think, like vulnerability disclosure, when you think about the idea of just being able to get input from hackers, there's no cash involved in that. But it's something that should happen, right? So yeah, that's where the whole points and thanks and whatever else thing comes in, because that's historically what's happened. Like, Google had their leaderboard, like Facebook had that. Really, when we kicked off BugCrowd, we looked for a way to appropriate or into something that could scale across multiple companies instead of just being for one, right? In terms of paying for bugs that are really critical, like something that we're starting to see do more is they'll run a VD program with points only, right? So they're not going out and committing to paying for anything. But if something comes in that's really, really cool, we'll actually highlight that to them and say, hey, this is a great bug. Like, this is not just someone out there doing kind of QA on your stuff. Like, this is someone who's put a lot of effort into helping you get more secure, and oftentimes they'll actually pay for it. So like it's one of those things where I say that with some reservation, because I don't think that's something that people should expect, but it is happening more. And in general, I think the whole push from the platform providers to get people to reward issues that are significant, that's what we're always trying to do. Like, we want to get money out to you guys to help you pay your bills and keep the lights on and do all that stuff, but also to encourage you to do more of this stuff so we can make the internet better. So it's one of those ones where, again, it's a work in progress, but that's kind of where it's up to right now.
Help hackers buy Bitcoin.
So, if I could just pose a question to you, say I have a bug.
That's what I'm here for.
Say I have a bug in something, and I don't feel comfortable approaching that company with the bug. Do you think that there is like a space where someone can act as like a proxy between me and the company to sort of have this sort of transaction take place, despite the fact that they haven't agreed to be like have a bug bounty in the first place?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, there already is. I mean, that's really the function of certs, right? Like, when you talk about Cert US, Cert CC, OzCert, that's their job. Like, that's actually what they're there to do, and what they were kind of commissioned to do in the first place. They're also kind of slow, so I can understand why that would be potentially frustrating for people that are in that position. So yeah, I mean, reaching out to folk like us and saying, hey, we've had to do that a fair bit, because I think based on what we're doing proactively for companies that go out there and say, yes, you're encouraged to do this, and here's the channel, it kind of that will help out if there's a reactive situation. And really, the priority that we take in that kind of conversation is to make sure that everyone's staying safe from a legal standpoint, because the challenge to doing that, depending on what you've hacked and found a bug in, oftentimes you're in violation of some sort of law, because there isn't a kind of a exemption that's been put out there to say that your testing is safe. So that's the first thing. I do think the idea of, it's funny because like vuln disclosure and like testing for vulnerabilities in web apps is becoming a little bit like jaywalking. Like, it's still technically illegal, but you can kind of get away with it. So it's one of those ones where I prefer to see is for organizations to go out there and say, no, here's us telling the hackers that they are like green lighted to go off and look for this stuff. And if they find it, then this is how we'll respond.
For Australia, I believe that one of the relevant laws states that if you scan if you scan something which included war dialing. Considering the age, I'm fairly sure that if
Probably.
you scan it and you find nothing, that's okay. But if you scan it and you find something, whether you exploit it or not, that could be considered a crime. But it all comes down really to A, did anybody notice you? B, were you reported to the police? And what is their take on it? So like, was your intent criminal or was your intent not criminal? And now there's no guarantees on any of that. And I don't know anybody who's ever been prosecuted in Australia for port scanning, but it's still a thing and it's in a law book somewhere that somebody could pull up. So it's good to know about,
It's definitely important to understand that. Like ultimately, if you're going out looking for injections in sites that don't invite you to do that, like you're basically at risk. So and like, is that the right thing or the wrong thing? That's not really what we're talking about right now. Like, we're talking about whether or not that's legal, and if you as the hacker are in a position where you're exposing yourself to danger. So yeah, I mean, that's it's a good thing to call out.
Do you think at some point in the future that these sort of bugs that people find could be rewarded?
Potentially, I do. I think the thing to be cautious of there is that it turns the conversation. Like, when you think about it, if you're running a company, right, you've never interacted with a hacker on the outside world before, and then someone reaches out and says, "Hey, I've found something, and by the way, I'd like you to pay us for it." It's pretty confronting. Like, that's a pretty scary situation for them to be in, and that, I think, is actually the kind of the seed for a lot of the silly stuff you see go down when people try to do that, right? It's not so much about whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether they should pay or don't, or whatever. It's about the fact that companies that haven't thought ahead around this whole idea, and who are dealing with it reactively, are generally pretty terrified of the interaction, because hackers are scary people. Like, I read it on the internet somewhere.
I mean,
do you know what I mean? So it's like,
if you turned it around and you said, like, if you put in a situation where you contacted someone and said, "Hey, I have the password to your email, pay me," they're going to be like, "Oh, this is extortion, I'm calling the cops." Like, you know what I mean? That's basically how they're seeing it.
It functionally is, and I think the thing is that this goes to, I mean, like, the thing I always call out is if you jump on like Google image search and search for hackers, you get a bunch of really scary looking shit coming up, right? Like, that's what people that aren't in our sphere perceive us as. To recognize that for a second, because it's like, okay, these conversations are inherently intimidating and confronting for people that are on the receiving end, and that's the starting point. Like, should it evolve from that? Absolutely. Like, are we working on trying to make that happen? For sure. But does it make it not scary today? No, it doesn't. Like, that's really the starting point of how this all looks. So just being aware of the fact that that's basically true, and will continue to be true for a while, I believe. That's a good thing.
Ironically, we're speaking on ThugCrowd.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, like, we make shirts that say "My other computer is your computer," right? And like, it's deliberately like this intrigue and fascination in this whole area of like hacking and breaking into stuff and things that are mysterious to people that aren't in this space, but also trying not to be too scary as we're doing it. And I think that's part of what we need to actually be mindful of at this point, because where we are right now, like, the conversation around being able to accept the input of the white hat hacker community across the board, or like any hackers, like, forget about the hat, people that are giving you information that you can use to make your company safer, right? Like, there's been incredible progress in that, I believe, over the past 5 or 6 years, but it's still early. Like, it's still not normal. It's still fragile.
I think Johnny Long had that I Had Charities shirt that went out, and people took that both ways. Some people who got it were like, "Oh my god, so good, you had charities and whatever, that's great work." and everybody else was just like, "You fucking piece of shit! You hack charities! You jerk!"
Yeah.
Like, no. I help people.
Goes down to the whole.
It's kind of dumb. You have to explain what you're doing before you explain who you're doing it to.
Yeah, and it comes down to the whole like definition of hacker that's been going on for longer than I've been alive, frankly.
Yeah,
it's a thing. Like, people don't really understand what we do outside of our sphere, and it's good to know that. I guess, like, does that suck? Do we want to try to change it and make it better? Absolutely, but it's good to first, I think, acknowledge it and just realize that that's a true thing, and then figure out where to go from there.
I think it's really interesting. Actually, you mentioned the definition war being longer than we've been alive. It's kind of like like it's people coming into security now, getting cybersecurity degrees at university, popping out and being like cookie cutter pen testers. They don't always realize that there would be no white hats if there were no black hats.
Yep, there is that.
Like, you can. They forget to think offensively because, like, you wouldn't even have a bank pass, like a password on your bank account or email or phone or anything if nobody was going to try and break into it.
And at that point, I said, on that point, I'd just like to thank you.
Yeah. Get into like art or something. I don't know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, without an attacker, there's no point to have defense. The attackers are out there and bad shit happens. So here we are.
I mean, it exists, so bad shit will happen.
Sure. So, I guess, do you have any, like, as we're starting to get towards the end of this, do you have any sort of final words to people who are thinking, I feel like there's a lot of people who want to become researchers, they want to do this kind of stuff, and they have the skills for it, but they might not have, I guess, they don't think that they can actually do it. So I guess, do you have any sort of words of encouragement for people who do tinker and play around, but should probably do something that would kind of help them hone their skills and actually develop real application security skill set?
For sure. I mean, I think, first up, encouragement. Like, I didn't think I could build a business like this, right? So I think we're all capable of stuff that surprises us, and we don't know unless we try. Starting kind of motivational thing there, but it's ultimately true. Like, you don't figure out that you're good at a thing until you give it a shot. So I do encourage everyone I meet who's interested in this space, regardless of how I perceive their technical skill or whatever else, to just get in there and try. Like, go put some effort into it and see what happens. I think, to me, the most valuable thing to understanding how to improve your skills, especially in this space, is community. It's learning peers, learning from your mentors, learning from people that you look up to, learning from people that you're trying to teach. All of that stuff. Like, that's really how you refine your skills over time. So getting involved in the hacking community, understanding its culture, because it's pretty quirky.
Sorry, MG, I just admitted you.
Hey, so I got just one quick thing. I don't think we've touched on it much, and I know we're a little crunched for time, but there's as far as like upward trending of payouts and stuff, that's obviously like a win-win for everybody, pretty much, except for the companies that are paying out, I suppose. How does that? It seems to be going in the right direction lately. How do we kind of keep that momentum going, though?
Yeah, I think the companies that we put a fair bit of work into helping the people that we work with on the company side understand that this is a marketplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're going out and trying to attract information and effort, then the more you put on the table to do that, what you'll get. And you have to balance that out, because you don't want to be kind of irrational with how you do that. But there is this kind of increasing kind of payout thing, basically what we do is we say, okay, once your bugs drop below a certain level, you should increase your rewards.
Yeah.
Because what it means is that you've basically graduated the tier of interest. Like you've become more secure than the kind of incentive you're providing is able to flush out flaws in, right? And that's a good thing. So you should continue to do that. One of the things that we're seeing, which is really cool, is people starting to use their rewards and how they've structured those rewards as a proxy indicator of the cost to attack the business as a whole, and actually reporting that up to the board, right? Like it's not a perfect thing, but it correlates in some ways, and it's an interesting data point. So yeah, we're putting a fair bit of pressure to keep companies increasing their rewards as they resolve these issues and as they get better at not introducing them in the first place going forward. So there is definitely that. Like I've always been wary of this idea of creating a bug bubble, so to speak. Like I've seen programs come out elsewhere where they're paying out $500 as a minimum and get completely hosed and blow through their budget in like a month because they've got
I see.
or just silly stuff around the place. So you have to approach it rationally. But to me, like what the goal of a successful bug bounty program should be is to see those rewards increase almost in perpetuity, right? That's the mechanics of the model and like the game theory behind it. So we're pretty deliberate about explaining that to folk and helping them understand that. Like there's things in the platform that remind program owners of that as they go along. It's a reflection of companies doing this for longer and increasing their rewards and still obviously finding bugs because they're always going to be there. But also I think it's a reflection of the more critical stuff. So this whole idea of being able to go in and produce higher impacts because that's what you're capable of as a tester. I think that's becoming better understood in the community as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And I think one of the things I've noticed is there's a few accounts on Twitter and stuff that put out details of bug bounties when they're able to. And I didn't even realize this for the longest time, but those are sometimes delayed by years.
Can be, yeah. Because like one of the reasons there is that sometimes things take a long time to fix. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like,
especially if it's critical,
Or if you're talking about a bug that has its root cause in like a 50-year-old COBOL program, and the developer died 20 years ago. Like that literally happens. So it's one of those things.
It's amazing.
Some of that stuff, it is a thing, but it still should be, ultimately, like that's another thing around disclosure of issues when they're fixed. Like not everyone's ready to do that yet, but we encourage it wherever we can, and sometimes people do, which is good.
It's great.
Hey, so just to jump off the technical stuff for a second, as we're finishing up. So DEF CON is obviously coming up. A whole bunch of us are going to be there. You're going to be there. You are throwing a number of parties that have RSVPs open. Did you you want to talk about some of this?
Missed that last part. You dropped out.
Did you want to tell people to RSVP and arrive at all those sick parties that are going down, or what?
Dump it in the channel. Yeah, we've got a bunch of stuff. There's obviously the front end of the week is more suit and tie, and the back end of the week is more kind of hoodie and t-shirt. We're throwing a party with Dulcor at the Roadhouse, I think on Wednesday night. We've got there's a ton of stuff going on. Like we're sponsoring QueerCon this year, which will be awesome. Wow. Everyone should get along to that because I think it's a good thing. There's a ton going on. So I'll dump that in. We've got like a list of stuff. I actually like legit can't remember it at this point because it's such a massive list of stuff that goes on. I'm simultaneously excited and terrified for Vegas at this point.
as one should be.
I think if you don't approach Vegas with that kind of mindset, then you're in for a bad time. So yeah, I'm not entirely worried about that.
Well, thanks very much for coming on and talking to us about all this stuff. I know that we were talking yesterday and just seen a lot of different opinions and takes on bug bounties and things. So really appreciate you taking in all of our questions and talking.
Please come back too. This is great.
Yeah.
Good content.
I'll come back in and hang out and lurk and do the things. It's a pleasure to meet you guys and to have a chat. Yeah, and like good questions as well. I think what I love about this space is it's driven by the community. It's driven by people who kind of see the potential and see what's possible, understand that it's not perfect, but want to try to figure out how to make it better and push it forward. And that's really what this is all about. So yeah, it's been a really fun chat.
Awesome.
Well, thanks everybody for hanging out. We'll jump off the stream now, but tune in on Tuesday. We are going to be talking to Mainframe D767, aka Soldier of Fortran, about mainframe hacking. So it's something that I barely know. I don't know anything about it, so I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. And I know a lot of us here know the legends, but do not know the details. So.
That's a super obscure thing that I think a lot of us don't know about. That's going to be good.
It's going to be sweet. So thanks, and see you guys Tuesday.
Appreciate it.